Miriam Young is the executive director of the U.S. Council on Sri Lanka. She has traveled and worked extensively in Sri Lanka over 25 years. She's based in Washington, D.C. Miriam, let's talk about the fact that the U.S. government warned Sri Lanka that the Easter bombings were imminent. What can you tell us about that back and forth that went on?
Well, I think the U.S., as well as other countries, specifically India, had given their warning to officials in the Sri Lankan government. But as it has come out since this horrible attack, the Sri Lankan government is in a state of, or has been in a state of disrepair. Falling out of the coalition that came into power in 2015, and because of the break and the rivalries between the parties and the officials, particularly the president and the prime minister, a lot of these warnings were just not passed on. The
prime minister and the president are from opposing parties, correct? And they need to communicate, and they were not communicating.
Yes, and the origin of this is that last fall there was an attempted, it's really being called a coup by the president, and he tried to bring in he tried to sack the prime minister, bring in someone else from his party, and that coup failed, but it left this coalition in really complete disarray.
The ramifications of people not talking to people in places of power are really seen when you realize there was so many warnings started 10 days before, very clearly, bombings at Catholic churches on Easter Sunday. All of it got overlooked.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about how this will affect Sri Lanka's delicate democracy. Has the bombing set us back even further on the democracy they're rebuilding post-Civil War?
Democracy was already really coming undone before this happened, and the coup is obviously a prime example of that. You know, many of the democratic institutions in the country started to disintegrate slowly and consistently over the course of the war. And then alternate parties were in power during that war, so they both bear responsibility.
And this fall, they have another election. Those new elections coming up, what should we expect?
This concept of the need for a strong man as leader, for being really tough on law and order and terrorism, is going to become very popular, and it's going to certainly be used by the candidates. But it's also something of great concern.
So there has been such a traumatic history in this ancient land. Over 100,000 civilians killed in the Civil War. The tsunami took over 30,000 lives. Now the bombings. How would you describe the democracy that's grown out of the trauma?
Well, you describe it well, because this small country has really gone through many pretty serious tragedies, and so its kind of democratic system, which was really put in place at independence, when the British granted independence, the difficulties in Sri Lanka have to do with the very complex makeup of its population and the history of those different groups.
And Miriam, what we're learning on this show about that complexity is we just have to keep having incredible conversations about what it is to live side by side in democracy and in neighborly love. Okay, here's a key issue on neighborly love. The ripple effect of instability, political instability, is always refugees. You know, and we are at this great crisis in the world now, 26 million people looking for a home. Is the situation of refugee recovery beyond repair now for Sri Lanka on how they are going to help the refugees in their midst?
Well, it's a pretty gloomy picture at the moment, but I don't think that it's beyond repair. I really don't. And the refugees who have come to Sri Lanka from surrounding countries in South Asia, especially the Ahmadis, who are such a tiny minority in Pakistan, you know, they fled their own oppression, and now they are unfortunately becoming targets and pawns in this new conflict in Sri Lanka. So, I mean, it's heartbreaking, really. But I think that one can never give up.
Thank you. We too have hope. We're going to show a great example of how we can get engaged in caring for the vulnerable. But Miriam Young from the U.S. Council on Sri Lanka, you joined us from Washington, D.C. Thank you, Miriam.
You're very welcome. Thank you.